subscribe to the channel, and drop your comments below. Hey folks, if you're into gripping historical deep dives, jaw-dropping facts, and reflections on how the past shapes our world today, hit that subscribe button. Israel's defiant stand against the Soviet Union. Why did the T-55 tanks flop in their first battle, and what's the Arab connection? The history of military hardware is full of head-scratching moments. You'd think that cutting-edge machines, built with the latest tech, would steamroll their enemies right out of the gate. But reality loves to throw curveballs. Today, we're zooming in on why the Soviet Union's pride and joy, the T-55 tank, crashed and burned in its first major combat test. This isn't just a story about tanks. It's about people, mindsets, missteps, and the lessons learned from a pivotal moment in history. We'll transport you to the scorching deserts of the Middle East, right into the heart of the Six-Day War of 1967, to uncover how things went so wrong. And we'll explore how Israel, a tiny nation surrounded by foes, delivered a knockout punch that stunned the world. So what happened? Why did tanks hailed as some of the best in the world turn out to be so vulnerable? And how did Israel pull off such a stunning victory? Let's break it down, step by step, weaving in reflections, economic insights, and historical context to make this tale not just informative but downright captivating. Buckle up. This is going to be a wild ride. The Soviet push into the Middle East, setting the stage. Back in the 1950s, the Soviet Union was playing a high-stakes game of global chess. The Cold War was in full swing, and Moscow was on the hunt for allies to counter the influence of the United States and its Western partners. The Middle East, a region simmering with tension, became a prime target. Arab nations like Egypt and Syria were looking for support in their ongoing struggle against Israel, and the Soviets saw an opportunity to flex their muscles and make some cash in the process. Starting in 1957, the Soviet Union kicked off massive arms shipments to Egypt. This wasn't just a friendly gesture. Everything was backed by loans. For instance, Egypt secured a loan worth 700 million rubles at a 2% annual interest rate. In return, the Soviets delivered 150 T-54 tanks, 152mm howitzers, BTR, 152 armored personnel carriers, and a whole lot more. Over the next decade, these shipments only grew, and by 1967, Egypt and Syria were armed to the teeth with Soviet gear. These deals were a big deal for the Soviets. They boosted Moscow's global clout, brought in revenue, even if it was on credit, and secured loyal allies in a volatile region. But there was a catch. While the Arab armies had plenty of shiny new toys, they often didn't know how to use them effectively. This gap in training and readiness would come back to haunt them in the Six-Day War. The Six-Day War, Israel's lightning strike. By 1967, the Middle East was a powder keg ready to explode. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, backed by Soviet arms, were gearing up for a showdown with Israel. Their armies boasted hundreds of tanks, including the T-54 and the cutting-edge T-55, which were among the world's most advanced at the time. With thick armor, reliable engines, and 100mm guns capable of punching through almost any armor, these tanks looked unstoppable on paper. But Israel, despite its small size and population, was ready to rumble. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, leaned heavily on support from the United States, which supplied tanks like the M48 and M60 Pattons. Yet Israel's real edge wasn't just in hardware. It was in strategy and training. Knowing they were outnumbered, the Israelis bet on speed, precision, and a blitzkrieg-style approach. On June 5, 1967, the Six-Day War erupted. Israel struck, first with a devastating preemptive blow. In just hours, the Israeli Air Force wiped out most of Egypt's air force on the ground, leaving the Arab armies without air cover. It was a game-changer. Then came the ground operations. On the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights, Israeli forces moved like lightning. Arab tank columns, packed with T-54s, T-55s, and even older IS-3s, were obliterated. According to Israeli reports, the Arabs lost around 800 tanks, with about 350 captured as trophies. Half of those were T-55s. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a total rout. Why did the T-55 tanks fail so badly? So what went wrong? How did tanks that aced their test runs end up as sitting ducks in real combat? Let's break it down into a few key reasons. 1. Arab tank crews weren't ready. The biggest reason for the T-55's failure was the lack of training among Arab tank crews. Soviet instructors who trained Egyptian and Syrian soldiers repeatedly noted that their students weren't exactly eager learners. Many tank crews didn't know how to use their sights or aiming systems properly, making their shots wildly inaccurate. Worse, they often ignored basic tactics, like coordinating with infantry or air support. Post-war Soviet reports were scathing. Crews abandoned their tanks at the first sign of trouble, especially during air raids. Instead of digging in or retreating to cover, many just ran. This led to a staggering number of tanks being left behind, far more than were actually destroyed in battle. The Israelis captured hundreds of fully functional tanks, simply because their crews had bolted. 2. Israel's blitzkrieg tactics. Israel, on the other hand, had done its homework. Their tactics were straight out of the World War II playbook, inspired by Germany's lightning-fast blitzkriegs. The Israeli Air Force played a starring role, hammering Arab columns before they could even get into formation. Without air cover, the Arab tanks were easy pickings for Israeli jets. Israeli tank crews were also top-notch. They knew the terrain like the back of their hands, maneuvered quickly, and used the landscape for cover. While Arab columns plodded along predictably, the Israelis hit from the flanks, struck weak points, and vanished before the enemy could regroup. 3. Technical shortcomings. The T-55 was a solid tank, but it wasn't perfect. Its armor could withstand most anti-tank weapons of the era, but the Americans supplied M48 and M60 Pattons, with their 105mm guns, could punch through the T-55's front armor. On top of that, Arab crews often neglected basic maintenance, leading to breakdowns at critical moments. The Arabs also clung to outdated tactics, fighting as if it were still the 1940s. Meanwhile, Israel embraced modern warfare, using real-time intelligence and tight coordination between air, ground, and armored units. 4. The Ghazi mindset. Another factor often cited in analyses of the war is the Arab soldier's mindset, summed up by the term Ghazi. A Ghazi is a free-spirited warrior who fights for glory and loot, not for rigid discipline or complex strategies. For a Ghazi, war is a quick raid. Strike fast, win, and vanish. But in modern warfare, where success hinges on teamwork, discipline, and preparation, this approach was a recipe for disaster. Arab tank crews often drove with open hatches, not to scout the terrain, but to make it easier to jump ship if things got hairy. This left them vulnerable to air strikes and even infantry attacks. The Israelis, by contrast, operated like a well-oiled machine, with every soldier knowing their role and executing it flawlessly. The economic fallout. What did the war cost? The Six-Day War didn't just reshape the Middle East's military landscape. It shook up the region's economy, too. Let's take a look at the financial impact on the key players. The Soviet Union, a costly misstep. For the Soviet Union, the war was a gut punch. The arms supplied to Egypt and Syria, worth billions in today's dollars, were largely destroyed or captured. After the war, the Soviets had to ship even more equipment to replace the losses, piling on more debt for their Arab allies, debt that was unlikely to be repaid. Egypt, for example, was in dire economic straits after the war, with its infrastructure in ruins and tourism a major revenue source, tanking due to the instability. Israel, victory with a side of profit. Israel's win wasn't just military, it was an economic boon. Capturing the Sinai Peninsula, Golan Heights, and Gaza Strip gave Israel control over valuable resources like oil in the Sinai. The hundreds of captured tanks, including T-55s, were a windfall. Many were repaired and pressed into service, saving Israel millions on new equipment. Estimates suggest the value of captured gear was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Arab nations, economic ruin. For Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, the war was an economic disaster. Lost territories, wrecked infrastructure, and massive military spending crippled their economies. Egypt's loss of the Suez Canal, a major cash cow, was a huge blow. According to World Bank data, Egypt's GDP took a hit of several percentage points in 1967, and recovery took years. Lessons from the Six-Day War. The Six-Day War was a turning point for the Middle East. It proved that raw numbers and fancy gear don't guarantee victory. Training, tactics, and discipline do. For the Soviet Union, the defeat of their Arab allies was a wake-up call. Supplying weapons isn't enough if the recipients aren't ready to use them. For the Arab nations, the war was a harsh lesson in the need for reform. In the years that followed, Egypt and Syria stepped up their military training, which paid off in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, where they performed far better. Israel, meanwhile, cemented its status as a regional powerhouse. The victory boosted its confidence and deepened its alliance with the United States. My take: why history keeps repeating itself. Reading about the Six-Day War, I can't help but wonder why we keep seeing the same mistakes. Nations pour billions into high-tech weapons, but without trained soldiers and smart strategies, it's all for nothing. The T-55 was a beast of a tank, but in untrained hands, it was just a pricey paperweight. This feels eerily relevant today, with countries spending fortunes on drones, missiles, and jets, only to see them underperform when strategy or training falls short. The Ghazi mindset is another fascinating angle. It's not just a quirky historical footnote. It's a reminder that culture and tradition can shape how wars are fought. In a world where conflicts are increasingly high-tech, the human element remains the X factor. That's a lesson we can't afford to forget. Wrapping it up, learning from the past, looking to the future. The story of the T-55's failure in the Six-Day War is more than a tale of military missteps. It's about the importance of preparation, strategy, and adaptability. It's about how a small nation outsmarted a larger foe through grit and ingenuity. And it's a reminder that the past holds lessons that can guide us forward. If you're as fascinated by history's twists and turns as I am, subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below. What do you think about the Six-Day War and the T-55's flop? Was it all about the Ghazi mindset, or did Israel's tactics steal the show? Let's get the conversation going. And don't forget to share this story with your friends. History deserves to be explored,